What's going on, everyone? We are getting some real juicy spoilers here nearing the end of spoiler season for set 4. And so we've got one of the final two leaders that we are waiting on in the cunning heroism category. Of course, we've got Major Von Reg, which we've kind of went over a long time ago. Don't know what he is going to do, but we saw him at least. So that's going to be the expectation. And we got a bunch of really interesting cards, actually. So let's go ahead and dive into it. A big thank you to my patrons on Patreon. And let's talk about the new colorless base. So this is, I'm assuming, the final base. I actually didn't expect a 5th unique base from this set. I thought we were done after a single additional base. I don't remember them saying something, but of course that could have been a long time ago. And I've been so excited about the spoilers, I could have easily potentially forgotten the final base. But this colorless base is interesting. I don't really know how impactful it is. So what do you get for playing no secondary aspect? You get 4 additional HP on your base. Now, I think the easiest comparison is to Colossus, the new Vigilance base. Because if I think about what decks could be potentially playing Lake Country, it's going to be all those kinds of decks that really kind of steer towards a single aspect. Don't play that many double aspect cards, or if they do, it's already going to be a double aspect that's out of aspect. And you're going to find that, okay, the extra 4 HP really matters. For example, if you were playing Sabine Green, and let's say Sabine Green, you actually only play like 1 green card. Again, that's not how Sabine works right now, because ECL is like the best part about Sabine Green. But let's just assume for a second that in a very aggro deck like Sabine had very, very heavy leanings towards a single aspect. You don't really care about the extra 4 HP in that deck. Would you sacrifice just a little bit of aggressive power for that? No. What you're looking for is a more mid-range / controlling deck that could take advantage of the 4 HP going later and later into the game. And then, of course, the decks that are most going to benefit from it are oftentimes the most controlling decks, where your whole focus is to be removing units and to survive into the later game. So, obviously, the first thought I had was like Bosk Blue, because that's the most popular control deck. Immediately going to be unusable in Bosk Blue. Half the reason, well, I shouldn't say half, the vast majority of the reason why Bosk works is you have the combination of Bosk and the bounties, but then all the vigilance cards that support that archetype. Avengers, Super Laser Blast, Snokes. These are the late game powerhouses. But in the early game, we've got takedowns. We've got Fell the Dragons. We've got perilous positions, Dr. Pershing's, the client. The majority of the deck oftentimes is vigilance cards. So that's obviously not going to work. But what about a deck like Double Blue Iden? Well, of course, that one plays all vigilance cards, but you wouldn't be able to play vigilance itself for that 4 resources, which is the biggest downside. I think that's probably the most viable option for Lake Country, but honestly, I think you would prefer to have Colossus over Lake Country, because Colossus gives you extra 4-cost vigilance, and the downside of, having that one last card isn't really that big of a downside in these types of decks. So then, okay, if controlling decks that we're oftentimes seeing, not really the, I guess you get cup of tea for Lake Country, what about the more mid-range style? And again, this is where I'm like, do I really want to be giving up a whole nother aspect? The most popular mid-range style of decks oftentimes are going to be like the Anakin Blues, the Ray Reds. And if you look at that Anakin Blue, I mean, you have all of the really good payoffs at the end game for oftentimes heroism, like Luke's and redemptions that kind of bring you back into the game that aren't going to be, well, viable because they're 2 extra costs with Lake Country. And then you're not going to have the removal options like takedowns and perilous positions. But then in Ray Red, you're not going to get the whole force throw alongside a couple of the more awesome threats in the early game, as well as Tarkin Town itself. So you lose a lot there. I'm not 100% sure about Lake Country. This one's going to be definitely interesting. I think it's definitely one of those bases that could potentially have use, but it's not really fitting within any archetype that we currently have, at least at the top of the meta. Maybe there's something a little bit, in the B tier or like bottom of A tier that I'm not thinking about. This is also a base that really benefits from being a card in the latter sets. And what I mean by that is if you have 4, 5, 6 sets, because we can't have more than that, this card gets a lot better. And right now we're in the 4 set stage. So we actually have a good amount of cards to play with Lake Country, because you can only have that single aspect, at least right now, in your deck with Lake Country. So there needs to be enough of that single aspect type of cards to benefit. And I think this card could get potentially better when we get the 5th set or 6th set. We can come back to Lake Country potentially. But as of right now, the double aspect cards are pretty good. And so you're missing out on those guaranteed. And then the single aspects aren't powerful enough, as far as I've seen, to really give up that secondary aspect with the select few good cards to run Lake Country for that +4 HP. Because remember, the players can just play their base with a 30 HP base. And in some cases, like the new Vigilance base, can just still run Vigilance with a small downside for even more HP, which is just going to be better. So not really sure how Lake Country fits, but it is interesting that they're willing to kind of do these weird things. And I'm interested to see maybe a double aspect base in the future for, like, you know, -5 HP, you could play double aggression cards. Like something like that could be really, really cool. I think that could definitely shake up the meta. I think Lake Country isn't quite there. But then we've got the brand new leader, and my goodness, does this look sweet. Okay, absolutely sweet. So first off, we have a Cunning Heroism leader, Kazuda Xiono. I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. This is the main character of the Resistance TV show, which I have not watched at all, and I honestly do not care for it that much. So if I butcher the name, I apologize. But he has an action to cause a friendly unit to lose all abilities for this round, and then you get to take an extra action after this one. So a person that gets to cheat, or a leader that gets to cheat on actions and take away your abilities. Okay, well, is this ever going to be good? There's a few things initially that look potentially decent, but it's certainly with a couple of the cards that we're going to be revealing today where he really starts to get insane. He does deploy for 4 resources, and he has the 2/5 body, where on attack you can choose any number of friendly units and make them lose abilities. Okay, he's got a pilot version, which is +3/+3. Again, on attack, you can choose a bunch of friendly ability units to lose all abilities. Okay, kind of interesting, a little bit of a pump. You know, +3 damage with 4 deploy is good. We've seen it with Sabine. That extra early pump is really, really nice. So that is reasonably aggressive. And of course, he's meant to be working with pilots. I will say one of the premier cards with this leader is Millennium Falcon, right? Immediately. Millennium Falcon, one of the best Cunning Heroism cards in general. It fits perfectly with this, because for those of you that have reviewed the way the turns are set up in Star Wars Unlimited, you would know that the action phase is actually the beginning of a round. And then when you go through the regroup phase, you are regrouping all the drawing cards, readying up resources, and all that stuff. And that Millennium Falcon action, or the triggered ability, is to pay that 1 or it returns to your hand during the regroup phase. So when you use this action, you remove all those abilities on Millennium Falcon, causing you not to have to pay that extra 1 for Millennium Falcon. So you potentially with Kazuda here, turn 1, you play something random, whatever space unit. Turn 2, you play your Millennium Falcon, you immediately can get in a ton of damage. And then you can still play on curve. That's pretty powerful already. That's already pretty interesting to me. Things like Cartel Spacer, or Cartel Turncoat rather, on turn 1 with that bounty, you'll remove the bounties from it, which is potentially interesting as well. There's a lot of interesting things you can do with it. But then we talk about the new cards. And this is where Kazuda can really shine if there's more cards printed like this. The first one is this 2-cost space unit in Cunning Heroism. It is just straight up a 3/3. It's a straight up 3/3 space unit. Doesn't have raid or anything like that. It's just a straight up 3/3 space unit, which is honestly insane with Kazuda, because again, you can use Kazuda's action immediately on the fireball on turn 1, and you can then immediately take initiative, right? Because you could take another action after that. That's really awesome, because this is essentially just a 3/3 in space on turn 1 in Kazuda. That's just what it is. But get this, it has ambush as well, which is crazy, because if your opponent plays an A-Wing or a black one or anything without 3 power, you could just kill their turn 1 space unit and have a 3/1 space unit left behind, most likely, in Kazuda, because at the end of the turn, it does deal 1 damage to itself. But again, you can remove that negative portion of it with Kazuda's action. So really, really interesting card. And I do think this is going to be really, really hard to beat if there are more cards that synergize with Kazuda, and you're able to play Kazuda to where you're mitigating all these downsides. You're still playing regular cards. Maybe you go with a cunning aggression strategy where you're able to put some pilots on and you just get in for massive chunks of damage and completely dominate the space arena while controlling the space arena. You just hit them in the base. That is insane. So this has some major potential. Again, 2 resource, 3/3 ambush. If you don't have the initiative and your opponent plays a space unit turn 1, you are sitting pretty. You are sitting pretty. And if they do play, let's say they're like, oh, I'm playing Sabine and my turn 1 plays an A-Wing. I'm going to pass to let Kazuda play their first play. Well, guess what? You can go Fireball. Okay, I play my A-Wing. You go, okay, I'll make sure that it doesn't have negative abilities, and then I will just take another action, take initiative. And then start of the next turn, you kill their A-Wing with Fireball. So yes, you don't get the extra 3 damage to their base, but it's still good even if you don't have your opponent play something immediately. You can still just play this and then just dwarf their units, right? That's just a really, really strong potential with a card. So I am really excited about this. But then we have another one, Contracted Hunter. This is a 3-cost ground unit in Cunning. It's a 4/4 ambusher. 4/4 ambusher for 3 resources. And it says when the regroup phase starts, you just have to defeat this unit. So obviously a card that is interesting already, because if you look at this, it's a 3-cost ground unit in Cunning. It's basically like a removal option for some early game units, especially units that were played on turn 1, right? You just ambush this out. It kills their turn 1 units. It's basically like a Power of the Dark set if you think about it that way. So in some Cunning decks, I could see this being a more interesting option as just a controlling option, right? Of course, you could also go ahead and, kill potentially their turn 2 play with like Ezra Bridger being that turn 2 play or something like that with that 4 toughness. Less likely to do so because there's a lot of 5 toughness turn 2 plays, and oftentimes people are going to the space arena. So I don't know if it's going to be guaranteed, but it has potential already. But then you look at Kazuda, right? And this is a 4/4 ambusher that sticks around as a 4/1 or even a 4/2 oftentimes in these matchups where you ambush it out, you remove its downside, and suddenly you got a 4/2, you trade in with another unit, or you just go ahead and hit their base. And the 4 toughness is extremely relevant in a meta where you're finding things like, again, Ezra's with Han Solos, or Bodhi's on turn 1 with Han Solo, or you have the Sabines playing like K2SO on the following turn, or you have just them playing things like Battlefield Marine on turn 1, Fleet Lieutenants on turn 2, that type of stuff. There's a lot of things that this just randomly kills and it stays around for. So you get a lot of value with this. And I do think that has potential in Kazuda. Again, maybe more as a sideboard card because it's not really that aggressive. Like it is a 4/4. It's got good stats, but then you're kind of pressed into immediately using your ability on this guy. Whereas the Fireball doesn't have to immediately be used every single turn because you can, in some cases, take like an extra damage to that Fireball and it'll be fine. And it can even be piloted up to avoid that damage to force it to die or anything like that. But Contracted Hunter looks interesting. Again, these types of cards in Kazuda where you're able to remove these negative abilities to make the card way stronger is really interesting to me. Kazuda looks like one of the more fun leaders. Definitely a deck building, not nightmare, but I guess you could say challenge, because do you fully interface with all these these downside units, or do you do a mix? I would definitely go into the mix portion where you're not forced to use this action every turn, but you could potentially really buff up the rest of those plays with these downsided units to get some massive, massive value and then push in for the win. So I definitely think Kazuda has some potential in the game with more of these downside units. Again, Millennium Falcon's one of them, but you mitigate that one, and it's already one of the strongest units in the game. So really, really cool stuff there. Then we've got a couple more units that we saw yesterday, I believe. First off being Relentless Fire Spray. We have, 3 fire sprays? Is it 3 fire sprays in the game now? I can't believe we have 3 fire sprays, and we only have 2 Anakins. Like, that's crazy, by the way. There is someone has got, someone is on the payroll of Boba Fett. I mean, it's just a fact, guys. The fact that we have this many Boba Fetts, and we have Jango Fett, and we have 3 fire sprays is insane. We got another one here. This one's a 4/6 double aggression 6-drop in space. It's got on attack, you ready this unit. And you get to use this ability only once each round. So obviously, the cool thing about this is you attack for 4, and then you get to attack for 4 again. Because as soon as you attack, you exhaust the unit, which means that this can then be readied up. Now, it gets even more crazy when you consider, okay, I could play double aggression Boba Fett and pilot Boba Fett onto Relentless Fire Spray. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is Boba Fett a +4? I actually don't remember. I don't know if it's +5 power or +4 power. But regardless, it's either 8 power attack and then another 8 powered attack, so 16 damage, or 9 powered attack plus another 9 powered attack, which is 18 damage. So that's a ton of damage in a single turn. And of course, if you have any other pilot or anything like that, and you don't have Boba Fett, you could easily slot them on here and then potentially get in for, 6 damage and then another 6 damage. This is basically, I get this guy down and I probably will win the game. Now, it's a little bit tricky. I would have loved to have some sort of cunning viability, because obviously something like sneak attack works insane with this. And technically you could still play sneak attack with this, right? Because sneak attack gives it a 1 resource discount, so you'd be putting it at 7 resources. Or yeah, you sneak attack it, if you're double aggression or aggression cunning, it would be 7 resources anyways. And if you do have a pilot to deploy on this, 7 resources for 18 damage readied up immediately, or 16 damage readied up immediately, or whatever your pilot's capable of, is pretty insane. It's pretty insane. So I definitely think that has some interesting potential there. And, well, it's an interesting card. I don't find it to be baseline that great, because I think most situations I'd rather just have like a normal Fett's Fire Spray. If I just look at what normal situations will be like, I'd rather have an immediately readied up 5/6 to where I can attack that turn and then attack the next turn, rather than having to wait the next round before I can actually go ahead and attack with it twice. I'd rather have that immediate impact that turn over potentially massive impact than the following turn. But it does have some potential, and it is an entirely separate aspect base than the Fett's Fire Spray, so you have some potential there if you want to go on that route. But I'm curious about this one for sure. And then lastly, we've got Power from Pain. This one is essentially grit on an event. So it's 3-cost event in Vigilance Villainy. It is give a unit +1/+0 for this phase for each damage on it. Pretty straightforward. It's just grit. It just gives that unit grit, essentially. Now, if it has grit already, it's basically double grit, which is kind of cool. Now, it is just for this phase. So that's just for the action phase, which is kind of mediocre. We've seen these types of pump effects before. Like if I just look at probably the most close to this card, I would say probably Moment of Glory, which is the +4/+4 for a phase in command. And I think I'd rather take Moment of Glory over Power from Pain in most scenarios. +4/+4 is going to be a lot more relevant because it just gives you +4 power. Right? This means that in order for Power from Pain to be at least somewhat close to Moment of Glory, it would need to have 4 damage on it. 4 damage on it. That's kind of hard to come by. Of course, later on in the game, you're going to have a lot more damage on it. And like if you have something like a Redemption where you're able to deal damage to your own unit, of course, that's separate aspects, so that's not going to work. But something like that where you have 7, 8 damage on a unit, yeah, that's going to get +8/+0, but it's not going to be able to attack immediately. So your opponent can immediately deal with it. And again, the reason why I say Moment of Glory is probably just better is because the extra 4 toughness does matter, because your opponent won't be able to just kill it with one of their units, right? If your unit has 4 damage on it already, it's pretty likely for your opponent to be able to just attack with it, or attack with any of their units to finish it off. So I don't think this Power from Pain is playable at all. Like I think it's completely garbage. It's kind of cool though. I mean, grit is a fun mechanic, but I don't see this being playable at all. If this had an attack with the unit, maybe we have something that's somewhat interesting, but it doesn't, and so I don't see this being good at all. And I think even if it had attack with that unit or attack with a unit, I still would find it to be not necessarily insanely strong, maybe with some potential, but Still something that I would have to see it in play to see whether or not it actually could do anything. But that's going to be all what we've got today. New colorless base. What do you guys think about that? New leader. This one looks really sweet. Not necessarily insanely powerful yet, but really cool and fun. We've got a couple new cards, including the Fireball and Contracted Hunter that work with Kazuda and just could potentially just be good. Like maybe Fireball is just good enough. Like kill your turn 1 play. I've got a 3/2 left over. I killed your A-Wing. It takes a damage. It's a 3/1 now. I think it's a little bit temporary. I don't know if that's strong enough. I mean, it does kill their unit and gets in for some damage. So I think it might have some potential outside of, Kazuda even. Relentless Fire Spray. Is it good enough? I'm not sure. Double Aggression's a little bit tricky, and Power from Pain, completely garbage. There's one other thing I wanted to mention. The brand new Separatist capital ship, Invincible, that we talked about yesterday. A couple of you pointed out an important distinction that I had not kind of read when I was reading the card, and that is you don't have to have a unit for it to cost less. You just need to have a Separatist card, which means that also the leaders apply. So that's really, really cool because it does just get a permanent discount. The way I was thinking about it is I'm gonna have to have some sort of unique Separatist unit before the 6-drop mark, which there's not a lot of, just not a lot of. And so because the leaders work, it is a 5-drop if you're playing a Separatist Cunning aspect combination, and that does get a little bit more interesting. So definitely take a second look at that card if you haven't seen that one already. But thanks for watching, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll see you all for the next one.